How are you feeling about data collection these days? Today's episode is about getting the most information from the data that you are collecting. Hey, special educators, I'm Jennifer from Positively Learning. Welcome to the Special Educators Resource Room. If you're like me, you're always looking for ways to save time and streamline your work. That's why this podcast was created, to give you the systems and solutions you need to get your time back. Tune in for tips, tricks, and tools that will help you manage your workload and make the most of your time. Whether you're brand new or experienced, all are welcome in the Special Educators Resource Room. Hey there, it's Jennifer from Positively Learning. Welcome back to the show. Today we're going to be diving into a topic that every special educator knows all too well, collecting data. Now, I'll be the first to say that taking data is critical. It helps us measure student progress, informs teaching, and drives decision-making. It may seem like taking data takes up so much time, but I think it actually saves time so we know exactly what to focus on. But if you've ever been in a situation where the data you're required to collect doesn't quite capture what's really happening in your classroom, you know how frustrating it can be. I've been there too. Now, what in the world do I mean by the data wasn't really capturing what was happening? Well, in my school, we were very data driven. And while I didn't mind that, the kind of data we were focusing on, I didn't think was always helpful. For example, if we were tracking student levels, I'm just going to throw this out as an example. We could be tracking levels in math progress or reading. And let's say we had levels A, B, C, D, and so on. And of course, you can substitute 1, 2, 3, or whatever it is for your students. Many of my students would be starting at level A, and they would be staying at level A quarter after quarter. And according to the data that we were looking at, it looked like my students weren't making any progress. However, I worked with them every day, and I knew that they were. Has this ever happened to you, and what do you do about it? So what I realized I needed to do was I needed to take that level A that my students were starting at and break it down even more. I needed to break down A down to AA. I needed to take AA down to AAA, which is actually where my students were starting from. So I had to think about all of the student actions and behaviors that were measurable at each of these levels to even get up to level A. Here's another example. Say that you're using a traditional grading scale, A, B, C, D, and then F, and there's 10 points that you're measuring. Your students are starting off quarter 1 with 0 out of 10. Okay, that's an F. In quarter 2, they are 2 out of 10. They've made some big progress. And quarter 3, they're 4 out of 10. They have doubled that progress again. And then quarter 4, they are 5 out of 10. But if you're just looking at the traditional letters assigned to this, they're at an F, quarter 1, 2, 3, and 4. And it doesn't capture all of the progress that they're making. A student who was at a 7 out of 10 and then finished at an 8 out of 10 jumped up 1 point. But your students jumped up 5. That's tremendous progress. How can we capture that so that we can know exactly what to focus on? In other words, what can you do when the data doesn't reflect the true progress your students are making? Let's talk through a few strategies that can help you collect data that's actually useful. The first step is to break down your levels into smaller steps, just like I did with level A. Consider breaking down broad benchmarks into smaller, more manageable steps. If your students are struggling to hit a standard milestone, they may be making progress in these smaller, significant ways that aren't captured by the traditional assessments. Step 2, track the micro skills. Instead of focusing solely on those big milestones, like moving from level A to level B, you can track the smaller skills that students are developing. With a literacy example, this could include phonemic awareness or fluency improvements. Breaking down the learning process is going to allow you to see where that real progress is happening. Step 3, use progress monitoring tools tailored to your students' needs. So you're going to opt for more individualized assessments. So for literacy, this could be a running record or an informal checklist, or maybe you're going to use a task box like a performance task. This is going to give you more immediate, actionable data so you can see the growth in those areas that overarching level might not capture. Step 4 is definitely my favorite. So let's quickly recapture steps 1 through 3. Step 1 was to take that benchmark or whatever you're tracking and break it down into smaller, measurable steps. Step 2 was to track those micro skills instead of focusing on those big milestones. And step 3 was to use individual assessments for progress monitoring tools. All right, now we're ready to move forward with step 4. This one is so helpful. Collect observational data, because sometimes students are making progress that's not going to show up on a test. You can document behavioral changes, increased focus, engagement during independent work time. These qualitative data points can tell a more complete story of growth. I don't know about you, but have you ever sat at the table talking about data that you know is not accurate because the student possibly didn't have the student habits to take that assessment? Maybe that assessment required students to be using a computer or to focusing, and you're working on being able to remain in the classroom or staying focused or upright for 5, 10, 15 seconds. And your student is making progress in those areas, but the data that you're all looking at right now might not be capturing that. So you are bringing this observational data as an advocate for your student to show the progress that they are making. Step 5 goes a little bit farther into that. You're going to be focusing on functional growth. This is particularly for students working on life skills or fine motor tasks. You're measuring functional abilities, like how long can they stay engaged in a task? How much support do they need to complete this activity at their level of independence? Now, don't be me those early years where I would just get so frustrated looking at this data, seeing decisions being made about this data that I knew was not accurately portraying what my students were doing yet. So what am I actually suggesting you do? Do you have to double up your assessments, the assessments your school requires, and then the assessments that actually capture the growth? Well, not exactly. You might do that as part of your progress monitoring. It might just be a matter of organizing assessments that you already have going on in your classroom and attaching that to the information that you're sharing at a data dive or at the IEP table. It may just look like a one-pager that has this observational data captured and organized on it, maybe the last result of an informal checklist that you have used or performance tasks. It doesn't have to be so formal. You're really just opening up that conversation to say, hey, let's look beyond just this standardized test score. Now, where are you going to get this information that you can gather up to present? There's 2 helpful resources that can make your data collection and progress monitoring even easier. The first is a blog post. I will put the link in the show notes. It's taking you over to a blog post I wrote about using basic skills checklists for data collection. And it also includes the link to episode 13 of this podcast where I break it all down. These checklists talk about what we mentioned in step 1, taking those benchmarks and breaking it down. So it looks like this. You would grab a checklist that's aligned with the data that you are collecting for this school data checkpoint. And on this checklist, it's going to take that data point, but it's also going to break it down into all those prerequisite steps that lead you to that data point. And that's what you're going to be collecting data on. It can just be a quick one-pager. You can take that to the IEP table. The other resource that I will put a link to in the show notes is a spreadsheet. It lists all of the tasks included in the Taskbox Dollar Club and the Work Binder and the File Folder Dollar Club. This resource is a fantastic tool for progress monitoring those exact skills your students are working on. So you can find that link in the show notes. Be sure to click over and grab it. I hope this information was helpful for you. I admit I struggled a bit because I'm asking you to do double the work from not just taking the school data, but also taking the real data that gives a holistic picture of how students are doing. I certainly don't want to add more to your plate, but we do have to advocate and make sure that students are getting the correct help and that everybody is not just looking at a data point, but seeing the real student. I think the checklists help break it down and keep you organized, and especially if you combine it with the performance tasks, that can help save even more time. The performance tasks can be done as an assessment. They also can be done as part of your independent work system. Combine that with a checklist and you've got your data point. Data collection doesn't need to be and shouldn't be separate from student learning. Thanks again for all your support and for listening every week. Be sure to click on over to check out the blog post and the spreadsheet, and I'll catch you next time in the Special Educators Resource Room. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'm dying to ask, what'd you think? Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe buttons so that you never miss an episode. You can find the show notes and links for everything mentioned in this episode at positivelylearningblog.com. See you next week for more special education solutions.